The Fishing Paper Show is proudly brought to you by United Fisheries, bringing fresh fish to your plate.
Greenlip mussels are one of this country's iconic shellfish. They're very tasty, and even though they're as kiwi gets, today I'm going to infuse a little bit of the Mediterranean into our greenlip mussels. First up, some roughly chopped garlic. Give it a bang, and you'll see how easy it is to pull out the garlic. And when you're cutting, fold your fingers under, rest them on the garlic, and then rest the blade up against those knuckles. And that way you can cut quickly without cutting yourself. 2 medium onions, and we want to finely dice these. Remember, fold those fingers. Another herb that works really well with tomato-based dishes is fresh celery. Celery has the same texture and consistency of onion, so we can fry those together, soften them together. However, the garlic is a little bit more delicate, and if we put that in too soon, we'll burn. Now the idea is to soften these without burning them, and just as they're starting to become translucent, it's the perfect time to throw in the garlic. So to this I'm adding a whole tin of chopped tomatoes. And this sauce is all about flavour. So to that I'm going to add a couple of good teaspoons of tomato paste because we want the sauce nice and rich. And I'm also stirring in some kidney beans, red kidney beans, which I've pre-drained. Now I'm just going to turn down the heat and let this quietly simmer away while we prepare the mussels. Place the lid on there firmly, and we're going to let that steam work its magic. And there you have it, a couple of minutes under high steam, and they've popped open. Now another little secret when dealing with mussels is not to throw away the stock or the liquor, and to save this to add to our sauce. I mentioned earlier it's all about flavour, so to this at the last stage I'm going to add some herbs to give it that Mediterranean feel and kick. You can pretty much choose whatever you have on hand. I've got some flat leaf parsley, thyme, garlic chives and a little bit of mint. So I'm just going to roughly chop all these up and add them to the sauce. And it won't take long for those flavours to infuse and give it a nice Mediterranean kick. Okay, while that sauce is just finishing off over on the stove, we prepare the mussels. Now the key thing here is you've got to remove that bed out of the centre. And you'll notice that this end, the white end, the mussel has a foot on it. So to make it easier for our guests to scoop out of the shell, I'm just going to cut through that foot there, and you'll see that it pops out freely. Almost done. One thing remains. Right at the end we just add a good squeeze of lime juice. And there you have it. A rustic tomato-based Mediterranean sauce that goes superbly well with mussels. It's often said that home is where the heart is, and if that's the case, the West Coast is my second home. I'm here at Lake Brunner, just north of Greymouth, with Fishing Game's Dean Kelly and his niece Rosie, and we're looking at different strategies to have more success with lake fishing for trout. So Dean, how can we be more successful with our fishing on the lake?
Well, bearing in mind that trout are predominantly edge feeders around the lake, and they are more active in the evenings and the mornings. Also, there's not much point in trolling around with a lure if it's not doing the job, so don't be shy to try a few different things. There's lots of options you can use to improve your success rates. There's bait fishing, and you can also try the soft baits. Now these are very useful when it comes to going along the edges. I mean, one of the main complaints from anglers is that they don't like to go in close because they get too many snags, and you can see on these little soft baits the hook's on the top, so you don't hook up with anywhere near as much weed. So as you can see here, the soft bait is a pretty good imitation of the bully, which is the predominant food source in the lake.
Now, I've learnt this from a mate, Craze Bolan of Hokitika, who's used it to good effect for a number of years. The rig that Craze has shown us here, he's rigged one up for us, is a double treble hook on a trace with just a little bit of sliding split shot there, a little sliding sinker to get that down, and a loop that attaches that to the main line. To take the front treble and hook that under the chin of the bully, like so, and the second treble just hook in the gut cavity behind.
So if you're having a bit of trouble getting hold of some bullies, there's plenty of these guys in your veggie garden, and trout love feeding on these guys, especially when the lake's high and they're feeding up in the grasses and along the edges. I'm going to be using a worm tonight, and as you can see it's a slightly different setup, and I've got a little float on here. The main reason for that is the bully you can cast out because it's heavy enough, whereas the worm, it's a light little bugger, so we'll have to fill this with water, clip that to our end of a line, and we've got a little trace on the end of that, so the float will sit on top of the water, and on the end of the little hook we'll put Mr. Wrigley. And Rosie, do you want to have a go at that? Try to keep it up nice and tight against the hook. You don't want them biting off the bottom end of the worm and leaving the hook behind. So there you can see he's nice and tight against the hook.
Well, bait fishing, and in particular worms, is how I started fishing as a kid. And Dean, how does Fish and Game feel about bait fishing here on the coast?
Fish and Game's all about people interacting and catching fish. It's definitely a method that results in people catching more fish, so we're all behind it, particularly for kids. In fact, we've even gone to the extent of creating a put and take fishery at Kawaka. The whole point in that is that we're going to have a very high concentration of fish in a small area, so that when the kids come out, they cast out and they just can't miss. Just cast it over your head on this one, so you know, my big ears.
That would be funny.
The old bullies proved that they are a lethal bait because they got smashed big time right at the end by something that was fairly sizable, and unfortunately, in spite of the two trebles, it just didn't hook up, it didn't stick.
The breaks.
Them's the breaks. Well, it is fishing, and I think one thing that we can say, like all good fishermen, we'll be back. And that brings us to the close of yet another show. Time to thank my guest Steve Gaskell, Rick Vandersweet. Thanks guys for being on the show. See you next week. The Fishing Paper Show was proudly brought to you by United Fisheries Limited of Christchurch.